Hey, it's Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast here to tell you about Michelob Ultra Courtside. It's getting fans closer to the NBA with a chance to win prizes like courtside seats, a trip to All-Star Weekend, and much more. Check it out at MichelobUltra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra Superior Access, Courtside 24-25 sweepstakes, no purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 and up. Begins on October 1st, 2024, ends July 1st, 2025. Multiple entry periods. Visit MichelobUltra.com/courtside for free entry deadlines, and official rules. Message and data rates may apply. Void where prohibited.
Hi, I'm Tyler, founder of Cozy Earth. When you're thinking about the perfect gift, what better way to show your loved ones that you care than by giving them something that helps them feel better, sleep better, and add superior luxury to their everyday life? If you sleep in our sheets for 100 nights and don't absolutely love your experience, we'll refund your money. No questions asked. This year, give the gift of Cozy Earth. Once they try it, they'll never go back.
Use code Spotify at CozyEarth.com and save up to 40%. That's CozyEarth.com/Spotify.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Ducks Confidential Podcast. I'm James Crepia, joined as always by Ryan Clark, and we'll be going over and reviewing the latest Oregon win, a 49-21 shellacking of Washington that was not nearly as close as the 28-point margin of victory would even imply, especially considering that the last touchdown was in the closing and waning moments. Very lopsided, and we'll certainly get into that. A game that, going into it, you knew this game was not going to really be all that memorable, if we're going to call it what it is. This was a mismatch. Washington finds itself where it does. That doesn't mean anybody who's an Oregon fan should feel a remote level tinge of empathy or sympathy in that regard. After all, they lost 3 straight. So this was an opportunity to get some scale of redemption, some dose of it, insofar as certainly for the fan base. For the older players who had taken those losses over the last couple of seasons, obviously a nicer way for them to end their this portion of their careers and what they hope is their final home game at Autzen Stadium. But calling it what it is, you're not evening the ledger against virtually anybody who was a part of the games the past 2 seasons, obviously with the amount of scale of scope of roster turn, coaching staff turn, and all those things, even AD turn at Washington compared to the past. So I say a dose of, but that's a part of it. But a game that's ultimately going to be remembered for one thing above all, and that's 10 sacks. Because no matter who had won in the prior years, no matter who was coaching, no matter whatever, 10 sacks had not occurred in this game before. And that will be the one thing that probably stands the test of time when this game is looked back on as, it's the start of the Big Ten. The first time they played in the Big Ten, the first time it was landing against Fish. What stands out? Oregon's defense totaling 10 sacks would be, like I say, the one statistic, the one anecdote that will have lasting power far more than anything else. And we'll certainly get into other aspects of the game. And obviously take a look ahead to this week's matchup with Penn State in the Big Ten championship game and kind of the way that the playoff field is sorting itself out. But what stands out to you, Ryan, outside of the 10 sacks, which, again, I mentioned, you wrote about, I think we've all written about in some way, shape, or form since Saturday night. What else beyond 8 players contributing to 10 sacks stands out to you from this one?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the larger picture for that Oregon defense, which I think is definitely playing its best ball heading into the postseason. Really just week in and week out, one of the best units in the country. And we talked about it before the season at every level of their defense. They're not really being a major question mark beyond maybe, early in the season, we didn't know who the number 2 corner necessarily would be and how solid that person would be. And now you look out there and Nico Reed had a great season and Jabbar Muhammad did what you expected him to do. And the safeties had a great season. The linebacking core is deep and talented. The front line is formidable. And Derek Harmon's looking like a NFL player. And Jamari Caldwell is a really pleasant surprise and a really high quality interior defensive lineman. And my God, Mateo Uiagalelei, in the absence of Jordan Birch for much of the season, but, regardless of whether Birch is on the field, 10.5 sacks this year for Mateo. It was just a great year all around for the big guy. And, Birch in the minutes, or I guess the snaps that he did play against Washington, picked up couple sacks and a half, and was just as formidable as he's capable of being when healthy. So that was the biggest thing for me. I mean, in a game when you score 49 points and you feel like, as the Ducks said, you had your most complete performance of the season, which I think they did. It really feels like the defense being in the place that it is right now is what could win Oregon a national title if they are able to get there.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you're not going to be able to win and succeed at the highest level in postseason play, whether it was the 2-team BCS, whether it was the 4-team playoff, or now the 12-team playoff. You were not going to be able to succeed and win when it mattered and the games that mattered at that level. And particularly now in a 12-team where you're going to have to win at least 3, if not 4 games, if you don't have quality on both sides of the ball. Eventually, you're going to run into a problem. Somebody is going to be able to exploit whatever weakness you do have, and they're going to be able to take advantage of it. And that was ultimately what kept Oregon out of the playoff last year in its 2 losses to Washington. Aspects of its secondary were not strong enough. We're not good enough against a first-round pick quarterback with multiple NFL receivers. Against other teams, yeah, no problem. But not against that. And that's what the challenge was. Well, they went off in the offseason. They addressed it. They added Jabbar Muhammad, Kobe Savage, Brandon Johnson. And for as much as they lost in their defensive line, which was the oldest in the country a year ago, yeah, you mentioned Harmon and Caldwell specifically. Birch takes things up a notch. You could say expected or otherwise, but he does. And becomes and lives up to the potential and meets the potential that he has, albeit while missing a few games because of the multiple injuries that he suffered. And Mateo taking off the way that he did. Those are the things that make this defense what it is this season. It's better in virtually every statistic. But the most important statistic, beyond number of yards or points or anything else, that underscores all these things we're talking about, is not just havoc rate. Because you can look at any number of stats and say, well, they have this many more sacks now than a year ago, and it's even in less games. All right, but drill it, a step further. How about the number of plays? And the number of defensive snaps Oregon has had to defend this season compared to a year ago. And yes, 2 less games and counting. And still has more TFLs, more sacks, and what have you. That speaks to the havoc rate. And then you look into who are the players who are contributing, all the names we mentioned. But ultimately, when it turns into havoc, when it turns into TFLs and sacks specifically, Caldwell is getting some TFLs and certainly getting his hand on, on tipping balls and breaking up pass and all those things. Obviously, at Wisconsin, that came up. But sacks isn't what his role is. No, it's coming from basically everybody who's already here, with the addition of Harmon specifically. Brandon Johnson's contributed in sacks, but at a pretty low level, and he's not supposed to. But 729 plays over 12 games versus 893 over 14 games. That's the underscores. That is the difference, the number one factor. So for all the other numbers as a collective, or some of the individual statistics of this defense that aren't going to be as eye-popping, yeah, because they're playing fewer plays, because they're getting off the field, because at the rate of havoc that they're causing, other offense, the opposing offense can't find any success. That's the point. That's how this defense is doing it, and you saw it at a historic scale in this game this past weekend with the 10 sacks, which obviously leads to a massive jump on their season total, but doesn't just match a program record. Also matches the most in any FBS game in the past 2 seasons. You don't see that often. I happen to have covered a game. It was utterly preposterous, where it had 12 sacks. And that was ridiculous. And that was a Clemson defense that was historic for what it was, run by Brent Venables at the time. And they went on to have a pretty nice season. So all to say, when you have this kind of production and you are causing that level of havoc, this wasn't a blip. This wasn't, Oregon just dominated a rebuilding, rescaling, diminished Washington team and padded its stats. It's been a season-long thing we've mentioned in passing at times that got a complete eruption in this game by way of pass rush, specifically against a mobile quarterback.
Yeah, a guy who showcased some legitimate athleticism and mobility and confidence that was, I think, beyond his years in this game. I think that, Washington fans, for all the, things to mope about from this game, I think there is a great deal of potential there for Damon Williams. But, this Oregon defense, you mentioned it, the statistics and, the history that they are making, and it perhaps being the greatest Oregon defense ever, just based on talent alone. The talent goes alongside with the, I think, culture and buy-in that shows up more on the defensive side of the ball for this Oregon team than perhaps on the offensive side. That's not to say that the offense doesn't live up to it. It definitely does. But the defense in particular, the ball pursuit, the speed, the effort, these are things that are intangible, and these are things that are cliches that coaches like to talk about constantly. But when you watch Oregon, and we've watched them all season long be very consistent in this, they pursue the ball with so much effort and speed. And it's not just because they have a bunch of athletic guys. It's because they got guys that care and that are bought in and that fit in the scheme that Tosh Lupoy runs. And it's a really amazing thing to watch, and something that, again, you get to these bigger games, you get to a Penn State game, you get to the Big Ten championship and beyond with the college football playoff. Those are difference makers, because elite programs have those guys, and there are other programs around the country that do what Oregon does. They are not alone by that stretch at any point. So they definitely find themselves in that, I think, elite category of teams that are bought in not only to the scheme and to what they do on the football field, but the culture that I think bleeds through.
And they're, to your point, they are not alone insofar as elite defense in the Big Ten. Look, Ohio State, for all of its issues, particularly after this past weekend, defense was not chief among them. They did not lose to Michigan because of their defense, ultimately. But the Ohio State defense is statistically excellent. Penn State's defense is statistically excellent. Whether Penn State's offense has enough firepower, particularly at the receiver position, to not just win on Saturday against Oregon, but to be a major contender in the playoff field, regardless of what happens on Saturday night in Indianapolis. Both of these teams are making the playoff field. Where are they each deficient heading into the game and then for the rest of the postseason? I think for Penn State specifically, there are not very many questions about their defense, because they might have the best player in the country in Abdul Carter on defense. And some of the players in their secondary are awfully good too, and really multiple front seven defenders. But Carter is that guy. I mean, that's bottom line. Like, he's up for a National Defensive Player of the Year for a reason. He is the nation's leader in TFLs. He's a problem. So they have talent on that side. They have the best tight end in the country in Tyler Warren, and Drew Aller is efficient and productive, much more accurate this season than he was a year ago, albeit with fewer touchdowns. Bottom line, for as much as they have on offense, and they have a running back duo who's very, very good, but they don't have the receiving. Forget about compared to Ohio State or Oregon. That's just not fair. But that is the one major glaring weakness of the Penn State offense is the receiving core. Just calling it what it is. It's an area that they try to address in the offseason. They've added to it. They know they've got to continue to add to it, but they are what they are right now. They're still real good. But having said that, for as many games as Penn State has won handily, there's also been some games that, not just obviously the loss to Ohio State, which was a close game and a low-scoring game. There was also some other games like Minnesota only a couple of weeks ago that they had to grind that one out. That was a very, very close game. Yeah, if they had any, frankly, of Oregon's top 3 or 4 receivers, or any of Ohio State's top, certainly 3, but probably beyond that, receivers, they'd be in a very different spot. And they have a former Ohio State receiver in Julian Fleming, for that matter. But they do have Warren. And he is not just a receiving tight end, although he not just leads all tight ends in the country in receiving yards, he's one of the top receivers, period, in the country, regardless of position, in receiving yards. And, oh, yeah, by the way, he runs up as a Wildcat quarterback and carries the ball and has rushed for, I believe, over 200 yards. So he can do a little bit of everything, and he's an excellent blocker. There's a reason why he is almost certainly going to win the Mackey Award this year. It would be a massive, massive oversight and upset if he did not win the Mackey Award this season. He is that good. So they do have weapons, but where are they, if you had to say weak, comparatively speaking, that would be an area where the Oregon defense, for as good as it's been against the pass, yeah, they've got a major advantage there. Whereas Penn State's defense, excellent in pass rush, probably with the best defensive player in the country, really good in the secondary, and really every statistic in every major statistical category, the defense is excellent. Have they played, outside of Ohio State, a offense anywhere near as potent as Oregon's? No, not really. Not really.
Yeah, and it's an intriguing matchup for that reason. You know, starting with the tight end thing first, like Michigan had success throwing the ball underneath to Colston Loveland in that game that Oregon played at the Big House. But that wasn't obviously and clearly enough for that Michigan team to have the kind of success they needed offensively to win that game. And Oregon obviously is going to key on that when they play Penn State. So it's going to need to be more than that for Penn State. And we'll see how much of a game plan can impact a player of that caliber. But at the end of the day, look, like the Oregon defense is going to be laser focused on him. And, the Oregon offense facing the Penn State defense, there have been moments this year, certainly, where, an eyebrow may have been raised on how quickly and perhaps dangerously Dillon Gabriel gets rid of the ball under pressure. Now, he, for the most part, has done well. He's been able to use his legs to escape pass rushers. He's been able to throw outside of the pocket, make incredible throws in tight windows like he did on the road in that Wisconsin game to Terrence Ferguson. But it is something to think about if you're Oregon, how to avoid maybe an offensive performance like they had on the road at Wisconsin overall, where Gabriel did face some pressure, but the main issue was that he faced a formidable secondary from Wisconsin, which I think is relatively comparable to the one that we're going to see from Penn State. How does he react to that? What are the sort of fail safes that you find, and how much more involved is Tez Johnson than he was in that Washington game, which was relatively minimal, save obviously for that touchdown? What are the sort of, tricks that Will Stein has up his sleeve to make things creative and blow the game open and utilize these high level playmakers that have been doing it all season, throwing the deep ball, getting guys open in space that don't usually get those opportunities. I'm interested to see that level of creativity from Stein in particular.
The main thing on offense to take from this past week and apply it to, and hope to apply it to, for fans' perspectives, to the championship game. Were there a lot of deep balls? No, there weren't. No, there weren't. Should you fret about it? Not my opinion. One, you didn't have to. so who cares? I mean, you were running very effectively, and the pass game was not really having
Jordan
problems.
James was getting like 15 yards every other play in the second half. At least.
If it weren't for a couple of touchdown runs of 1 yard, his shortest run, I believe, was either 3 or 4 yards. Everything else was, which was staying on schedule. So everything else was just he wasn't slowing down. That's for sure.
No.
And Noah Whittington averaged 7.4 per carry. So bottom line, the offense was doing just fine. It didn't need to throw the ball some crazy distance just to appease those who think that that's a pretty thing to watch. It was unnecessary, unneeded, and ultimately, oh yeah, by the way, it was cold out, like quite cold out, and a little windy, and your top speed receiver was in his first game back, and your second speed receiver, who hadn't had a drop all season, had 2. So things happen. Bottom line, you're going to a domed environment. That helps. And the thing that matters most offensively, beyond the efficiency which was there in all phases, with Tez back, forget about how much he was or wasn't targeted and didn't come to the second half, whatever. Oregon was utilizing and was back to utilizing 11 and a lot of spread 12 when the game was still a game. That's what the offense looks like. The prior couple of games with Tez out of the lineup, they were much more in stacks and bunches and tight formations, especially in 12, at a higher clip than they were earlier in the season and certainly on Saturday. They were masking and covering up for his absence. And then, oh yeah, by the way, in case everybody forgot, Justice Lowe got hurt during the Wisconsin game. And oh yeah, by the way, he didn't play against Washington, even though he wasn't listed on the availability report, went through everything with pregame, but he didn't play. I would suggest he might be on the mend still from that rather significant hit that he took at Wisconsin now a couple of weeks ago. When you have weapons at your disposal again, and the offense is more spread out, your pieces are more spread out, throwing windows are more open, rush lanes are different. The field is not shrunk down as much. When you're out there with multiple tight ends, this isn't a criticism on any of them. This is just being realistic. You're not spreading the field vertically as much, or certainly not as quickly as when you have Tez Johnson on the field with Evan Stewart. I mean, it's just, this is basic common sense. When you have smaller and faster players on the field, the opposing defense has to counter that accordingly. When you have bigger, lumbering, large, physical tight ends on the field, they have to counter that accordingly. Well, when they're going to go out now in their offense that it's basically looked like for most of the season, yeah, this is the offense that you're used to seeing. Forget about who was targeted and how much on Saturday. Again, you didn't need it. And if anything, take it from the approach of, why put anything more on film or put anybody at a higher degree of jeopardy than necessary in a game that you were dominating by just, especially early on, just running the ball very effectively?
Yeah, well, they just had to keep it simple after a certain point, too. And
basically,
quite honestly, they could have kept it simple the whole game and probably reached a similar result just based
after
on the mismatch with Washington State.
Alone, there was no question as to, there was no way that Washington was going to be able to match up effectively in that game. There just wasn't. And calling it what it is, it didn't. The only thing that stopped Oregon was Oregon. The second drive, 3 and out. Yeah, because there was a drop on third down. The third drive, a fumble. Yeah, because Noah Whittington just decided to try to hurdle 2 guys and got the ball knocked out on the way down.
Yeah, that's like when you press the wrong button in Madden. You know, it just
then there's
happens.
An end of half, extremely long field goal attempt that comes up just short. And that's the ball game. Otherwise, every other drive ended in a kick. A PAT, specifically. That was it. And if you want to say even the missed field goal, all right, that drive ended in a kick too. And frankly, the drive that ended up in a kick with a punt on a drop pass on third down. The only thing that stopped them was them. That was it. So Oregon's offense was efficient, effective, and yeah, it kept its proverbial cards close to the vest, because why put anything on film, especially when you knew at that point that Penn State was going to be the opponent? Why would you give Tom Allen anything more as a reference point at all? Why give them and tip your hand about anything? No. Just say, oh, yeah, you know what they're really good at? Power. Yeah. Let them run that 25 times. Power, inside zone, outside zone. Yeah, just run that all day. Don't start dialing up some crazy exotic thing or showing all kinds of route trees and different concepts that you've either done before, but it's 10 games ago or last season, or, again, put guys in position to take hits that are unnecessary in a game that was very quickly not that competitive anymore.
There was a designed run for Gabriel later in the game, though, that I kind of was looking at over at our pal Joe Freeman. Like, I don't know about running that when you're up as much as they are. But that's thankfully one where Gabriel did not get hurt or put himself at too bad of a risk.
Oh, bottom line, the game they saw, they conquered in terms of the Washington game, and in terms of things to take away from it that can be applied going forward. Again, I say offensively, from a scheme standpoint, and from the various chess pieces on the board, you're going into the Big Ten championship game, offensively speaking, as well equipped and loaded as you can be. That doesn't mean there aren't some bruises and either minor injuries or what have. Look, Marcus Harper suited up. He didn't play. He's missed the last several games. Could he be back? Maybe. He was questionable last week. Again, he suited up. He did practice, limited, but did. But could he be back for the championship game? Yeah. Having said that, the right guard spot is not exactly some glaring weakness right now. Both Iuli and Rogers are doing just fine. So if they get Harper back, that's great for him and probably good for the offensive line. If they don't, I don't think that that's a particular glaring weakness. Although, yes, Penn State does have Abdul Quatter, and it does have also a collection of other players in the front seven who are awfully good. Kobe King at linebacker among them, and many others. They have a really talented defensive tackle, another defensive lineman, a second linebacker. Like, their whole front seven is awfully talented. Again, they're loaded with guys. But be that as it may, offense is very well positioned, particularly from a health standpoint. Again, obviously Garrett Bryant's back. You didn't see him at receiver, but you saw him on punt return again, and he had a nice return during the game. So didn't see Justice Lowe play, but again, suited up. Wasn't even listed on the availability report, but okay. So clearly either coach's discretion or they're just being precautionary, whatever. Seems like he's available. And then defensively, again, they're in an awfully nice spot. When Birch is listed as questionable and comes back and gets 2.5 sacks, yeah, I'd say he's all right. And when you can put him on one side and Mateo on the other, with Harmon and Caldwell in between, not for nothing, you're going to be able to go up against, not just to match and counter any opposing defensive line against your offensive line, you're going to be able to challenge any offensive line in the country with those four guys. Anybody. There is no offensive line in the country who is going to say, yes, we absolutely have a decided advantage against Oregon's front four. Nobody. No one. I don't care if it's Ohio State's offensive line at full health. Nobody has a decided advantage against those four players. And that I'm not even looking past anybody else. I'm just saying those four. Obviously, you could add Tatum. You could add the linebackers and Bossa and Betcher and Devin Jackson. You can go on and on. That front four and everybody else who they can mix and match in there to go with the front seven when you add in the linebacking core, that is the start of, and not looking past the secondary, that is just saying when you're going up against opposing offensive lines, and Penn State's is pretty good. They're pretty good. They've got some talent there. Yeah, you've got all the weapons at your disposal. And again, by way of health standpoint, this team's in an awfully nice spot. And now that you're in postseason play, the players who were redshirting, who weren't available to you because they played 4 games already, a couple of them are back in the mix. Now, I'm not saying they're going to play in the championship game necessarily. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. I think there are a couple of them that could, even in a limited capacity, but they could. Specifically, Ryan Pelham, Rod Pleasant, and Blake Purchase. Those were guys who, no, they haven't played in a minute. Yeah, because they were on 4 games. They were trying to save a year of eligibility for those guys. Well, now the 4-game redshirt rule is, the postseason is exempt. So those guys are now back in the mix, at least to potentially play. I'm not suggesting that they will or they won't. I have no idea. I'm saying that you no longer have to be concerned about the redshirt rule aspect for those 3 specifically. And that goes in, and I'm sure, again, Penn State has guys like that too. I'm just mentioning that, by the way, those are guys who would benefit from, now that it's postseason play, who could now be contributing again when they hadn't been as of late. They're in a good spot from a health standpoint. And not everybody can say that right now, obviously. They're in an awfully nice spot. Could it be better? Of course, everybody can say it'd be better. But they're in an awfully nice spot. They're the only undefeated team. They're well positioned at 1. And that'll set us up for the discussion that we can have here before the title game. And because, of course, by the time we get to you next week, not only will the title game be decided and who is off to the Rose Bowl, and if Oregon wins, they'll undoubtedly be the 1 seed. If Penn State wins, they could be the 1. I think they could also be the 2, particularly if Texas wins the SEC. But either way, it'll be the Rose Bowl. And the loser would probably be the 5 seed. Again, probably. I don't want to make it certain because, theoretically speaking, what if Oregon just blows the brakes off of Penn State? Theoretically speaking, does Notre Dame move to the 5 and Penn State's the 6? I don't know. Who knows? Point is, there's a negligible difference here in terms of the variability for the winner and the loser in terms of seed lines and those things. But the talking point that many have had for weeks now, we have not weighed in on it because we're not going to waste our time on projections where there were 5 weeks of regular season games to go. But at least now that the field has whittled itself down to, and most all the country is wrapped up, yes. What is the better path? A first round bye, no home playoff game, playing in the Rose Bowl against the winner of the 8-9 game, which who knows who that could be. Last week it was Georgia-Tennessee, but last week Ohio State was the 5, and of course they aren't. So whoever the 8-9 is it better to play the winner of that game and it need to win 3 games to win a national championship? Or, hey, now it's a weird incentive. You'd rather be the 5 because you get to host a playoff game on December, either the night of the 20th or more likely the night of the 21st, if you're Oregon, and who knows what the weather conditions are, against either a 12-seed Boise State, who at the moment may be the 4, but if Arizona State wins, maybe, just maybe, they move the Big 12 champion up at that point. Either way, you're getting that one, and then, the other one is probably going to be the team who has the bye, and you get to play them in the Fiesta Bowl on the 31st. What say you, Ryan, in the talk radio and podcast conjecture and talking point for the last month that we've managed to avoid and the painful exercise that has been, but now that it is upon us, this hypothetical argument and as I say, talking point and talking head argument for all the content of the world?
It's just exhausting.
That's why we avoided it until now. Yes.
It's just you don't want to play an extra game. I mean, come on now. Talk to any college football coach. Talk to any player who's been putting their body through the punishment that is playing football at this level, and they will tell you they want the bye. They want to win their conference, not just for the fact that winning your conference is a historic and important thing on its own, regardless of how the playoff goes, but the fact that you have one less game to play in a season that is already longer than it has ever been. they will have to play 16 games to win a national championship if they win their conference championship. 17 if they lose to win the national title. That is an enormous amount of strain physically, mentally, on a team, on their bodies. And it opens up the opportunity not only for you to have key players get hurt playing an extra game, but also to get upset. These things, they play the games for a reason. Just because Oregon is matched up with Boise State, who they've already beaten this year, doesn't mean that it's impossible for Ashton Genty and company to put together a perfect game and pull the upset coming back into Eugene. Yeah, and not allowed 2 special teams touchdowns. I mean, that game, that matchup alone, that was 37-34 in case folks forget. But obviously this is a different Oregon team, different Boise State team at this time. The matchup, regardless. 2 opportunities to get upset in the 5-12 matchup, and then in the aforementioned move on to the likely Fiesta Bowl against like an Arizona State or whoever wins.
Yeah, nobody from Arizona would be there for that.
Yeah,
nobody.
No, it's not like they wouldn't pack that stadium, and it's not like Kenny Dillingham worked for Dan Lanning or anything. You know, come on, it's just patently absurd on its face, the argument. And Dan Lanning has addressed this multiple times. Like, yes, there are the pros and cons, but at the end of the day, you come out there to win football games. And the less football games you have to play to go hoist the trophy that everybody wants to hoist, the better. Plain and simple.
I concur. I understand people's logic. I'm not saying it's not a logical thing. In terms of, I'm just going to assume it's an easier path. I get why people have the perception of that. And then you get to reality. It ain't your body on the line. Why are you just assuming health? Good, bad, or otherwise? This is part of video game culture. Because, hey, I'll just simulate it, or I'll just play it. Hey, my guys never get hurt. That's nice. It's a little bit different in reality. Ask Florida State from last season. You want to, you've got to play one more game. It's that many more plays, that many more reps where players on either side are susceptible to an injury. I think you would prefer to avoid that potential. No matter how unlikely. This is still football. And again, particularly in late December, mid-December, in environments that, hosting or otherwise, not ideal. If you can avoid that, I think you try to avoid that. Then you get to, by the way, this is still college. Did we not just see for the last couple of weekends how many teams in the top 15, top 12, top 10 falling against opponents who they had no business losing to? In some cases, losing badly. Oh, well, it's an easier path. Yeah. Really? Anybody want to ask Oklahoma and Alabama about who should just be assumed as better, easier? Or how about Alabama and Vanderbilt? All right. I mean,
how about Michigan, who didn't even sniff the playoff?
Yeah. How about
going into Ohio and winning
and playing better than them yet again, and taking it to them yet again, and being the tougher team, the better coached team, the better prepared team yet again, even though they had basically both of their hands tied behind their back and that they have no quarterback. That's been the case all season. That had no target to throw to because Loveland wasn't in the game. And defensively, while they, certainly had all their defensive line players and a opposing offensive coordinator who's so innovative, he decided to say, no, I have all these receivers. I want to run right into the teeth of the strength of this defense. That doesn't have Will Johnson and hasn't had Will Johnson for many games this season. No, darn it. I need to run right into the teeth of this Michigan front to prove a point. I don't know.
Yeah, you don't know what's going to happen in these games is the biggest point. Is like the idea that it's just penciled in no matter what, particularly in this era where there's so much roster churn, there's so much uncertainty, and there's so little by way of difference between so many of these top teams. Yeah, Oregon, I think, has been the best team in the country this year. Does that make them a unstoppable juggernaut? Of course not. Nobody even in Eugene would be arguing. There isn't a team this year that you could say that for. Has there been in the past in college football? Absolutely, but it's just dumb. It's just like you're overlooking so many factors that make this sport so exciting and make it the way that it is to say that a team would want to lose its conference championship just for a potentially better path. It's not. It doesn't compute.
No, and again, to get back to the, it's all predicated on assumptions that are all under the most ideal of circumstances. Well, Boise doesn't look that good. Hadn't been playing that good lately. You still have you have the best running back in the country. Is that still the case? All right, as long as he's still standing upright, they're a live bullet. I don't care where they're playing. I don't care if they're at home. I don't care if they're at a neutral site. I don't care. Is Ashton Gentry on the field? Yes. That's a problem. Against any defense in the country, that is a problem. Period. And it's
including your own, which gave up like a 75-yard run to him in
and
Austin.
If you took that away, he still had a massive day. So bottom line,
exactly.
He still it was mainly 4 to 5 carries, yes, that made up his the big chunk. But even if you took that one away, he still had a pretty big day. Bottom line. As long as he's there, you have one of the best players in the country, certainly the best running back in the country. Yeah, I don't think you want to sign up for that. I'm sorry. No, you don't. I don't care who you are. No. Oh, go up against your former offensive coordinator who has taken a collection of misfit toys and quickly turned them around into a 10-win team and potentially have to play them on basically their home field for all intents and purposes if it were to be a quarterfinal game at the Fiesta Bowl, or if you got to host them in that scenario. Oh, well, let's see. Does he know anything about Dan and Tosh? And does he have Cam Scatterbo? All right. Yeah, do that on a relatively shorter week. Like, come on now. Like, those scenarios specifically, like, heck, and that's not to look past Iowa State, who, by the way, among the many who's just getting overlooked entirely, they could still manage to earn a bid to this thing. Like, it, no matter how unlikely it. Yeah, like, it's easy for everybody to look past these other teams. I understand it, but it's all predicated on assumptions of which fans are supposed to do. You're supposed to feel confident about your team, particularly when your team is the undefeated number one team in the country. But you still have to, humble yourselves enough to say 3 games to win is still less than 4 games to win. Let's not overcomplicate this any more than that. 3 games. And for whatever the 8-9 was last week, again, we'll find out Tuesday night what the 8-9 looks like today. And whether or not that even holds true, because if it is one of the SEC teams, specifically if it's Georgia, which I don't think it will be, but whatever, who wins or loses the SEC championship game or the ACC championship game potentially will have ripple effects into that area of the field. So I wouldn't even put that much stock into who is the 8 or the 9 now entering the conference title games, but at least gives you some semblance of an idea, of a clue as to what that might be. But outside of it, truly, don't overcomplicate this. Again, this is not simulating in NCAA football, the video game. This is not, like you said, Brian, talking about playing either 16 or 17 games, and these are still college players. This is not the NFL. And these guys have not done this before. Be glad about the fact that your team's in a spot health-wise where they're as good as it is. All you need is the wrong thing to happen in a conference championship game, in any of these games, and I hope it doesn't happen to any team who's playing. All you need is one of those things to happen, and then there's so much for your assumptions. So I don't think the grandiose thought exercises that are have been had and will continue to be had through Sunday and then beyond about this are, again, I'm not saying they're illogical. I get what people are saying, but I think it is predicated on way too many assumptions falling in line just so, and in the most ideal of circumstances, that then make the 5 seed the ideal scenario. And then now, because that's possible, well, now you've got to tweak the whole system that we haven't even seen implemented yet. First off, can we actually see it implemented before we make those assumptions? 2, that was always there by design, so you can't act surprised. And 3, this is still college football. You said the upsets is part and parcel. Just assuming about this exists in pro sports. Years ago in the NBA, where you had the scenario where it became the argument about, well, if the division champions are the top 3 seeds and the 1 weak division, I think it was the Western Conference, and therefore it was an incentive to be the 6 and play the weak 3, as opposed to play up and try to get into the 4-5, because the 4-5 is the tougher matchup. And you had everybody trying to dog it and tank at the end in order to put themselves in that position. I get that. Those are professional players in a sport that is heavily reliant on a 7-man rotation. Not college players where there's 50 who are playing. I mean, come on now. Like, don't overcomplicate this. And don't fly off the handle about assumptions about things before you even see what the field is yet. Can we get through one iteration of this before everybody declares that they know everything? That's like you said at the start, right? There's a reason why we've waited until now to talk about it, because it is exhausting for no reason. At least now, all right, we're inside a week, and there's only finite possibilities still left. When people were talking about this 5 and 6 weeks ago at the start of this whole enterprise, and there were that many more games and that many more teams to think about, I mean, how foolish does some of this stuff look now? About what was the possibility of what happens if Army or Navy stay undefeated, and really? We wait. What? Could Washington State find its way in the playoff? Really? Would you like to go back to that? I mean, can we get into like the middle of November before we run it? Because the problem is that the oxygen in the room gets taken up by all of these conversations for weeks. And then the number 1 team in America doesn't even get talked about until, oh yeah, by the way. Really? We had to waste all our time and energy hearing about and talking about and reading about hypotheticals and scenarios that were never going to happen, as opposed to appreciating, oh yeah, by the way, Oregon's really freaking good. Extremely balanced. And yet, as one national writer wrote on Sunday, yeah, they're number 1, but they're awfully boring. Oh, okay. Good to know.
Yeah. What a boring group of guys. They're total. All the unbelievably like compelling video content that they put out on social media, not the least of which is for recruiting, but additionally adds to the narrative intrigue of this team with their very inspirational head coach. Yeah, what how boring.
Oh.
All these like big name players that have come in from other schools, including the quarterback who is charismatic and interesting. Yeah, how boring.
Again, like some people need a little bit of extra. I don't know. Yeah, I don't make the decisions for them. I can't speak for everybody.
We can just remind them.
All I can say is I try to respect and appreciate success and greatness when you see it. And this team is obviously awfully good. Has been that way, I don't know, all season. Even in the first couple of games where things were clunky, again, the defense was holding up in those games. Outside of 5 runs by Ashton Genty, yes, and he did have a big day. But with that exception, the defense was there the whole time. The whole time. So this team's been awfully good the whole way through. And the issues that it had on offense the first couple of weeks, it obviously course corrected. And it has, for all the lazy, low-hanging fruit questions all offseason long about physicality, the toughness of the Big Ten, and all this other stuff. Well, that was tired and boring. You want to talk about boring? That was boring. Really. Nobody in the Big Ten footprint apparently was paying much attention to Oregon's recruiting and its transfer portal additions and the like, dating back to the crystal ball era, and had just, collective amnesia about what Oregon did to Ohio State in 2021. They just omitted that from their memory entirely. Or what happened in the Rose Bowl in 2019. Forgot that Penei Sewell and a whole long line of NFL offensive linemen had come through. Forgot that too. Forgot Kayvon Thibodeau. Again, just never happened. All I know is it's a West Coast school that played in the Pac-12, and now it's playing the black and blue, 3 yards in a cloud of dust Big Ten, and it's a finesse team that had shiny uniforms 20 years ago, and that's all I knew. Did you know Chip Kelly once coached there?
He did. Yeah, I think that's one of the central themes that can maybe come out of Oregon potentially winning this national championship is hopefully, and of course it won't, but hopefully in part putting some of those narratives to bed, because it hasn't been true for a very long time. And the identity of this Oregon team, as we've talked about throughout this podcast, is their defense, it's their physicality, it's their effort and intensity.
Yeah.
And those days are gone. Those days are over. It's not the flash and dash. This is Oregon football. Physicality, toughness, discipline, culture, togetherness. All of these superlatives that some coaches like to think they have it, and they talk about it a lot, but it's evident to anybody looking at this team from an objective standpoint and watching them on a regular basis, as we and so many of our colleagues have, that those things ring true. And that if healthy, if playing their best football, yeah, these guys can go do it. Go win the first national championship in Oregon football history, and hopefully put some of those narratives to bed about this program.
And by the way, they're recruiting at a top 10 level and have been for some time. Whether or not, again, with the benefit of time and hindsight, you can look back on some of those classes, particularly from the crystal ball era, and some stand the test of time, some do not. But they've taken it up a notch even further under Lanning, particularly last cycle and this cycle, and what's setting up for the 26 cycle. They are really, really raising the floor significantly. The cut line for what is a take now versus even Dan's first year, let alone early Mario, or forget about before that. I mean, you're not in the same lexicon. You're just not. You're just not in the same stratosphere. If you are not a bona fide blue chip player right now, you are probably not making the recruiting class. That's just the way it is. If you are a 3-star, you either are one heck of a diamond in the rough, or you have some freak ability that is being overlooked or not properly accounted for or whatever by the recruiting analysts. Because for the most part, these are basically exclusively blue chip classes. Basically. And needless to say, that was not true for ever before. So they have very, very much raised things up, and that'll be obviously we'll get into that more probably next week and certainly throughout the offseason because signing day is Wednesday. The portal officially opens next week, although with some coaching staffs already changing, plus graduate transfers, the market is already very much open for business. With most all the country wrapped up already, and other people are just going out there declaring that they're going to enter the portal, even if they haven't officially entered just yet, that they will be trying to get ahead of the game. So that flood of names will be rapidly increasing here over the next couple of weeks. We'll get to all that, and obviously go over the Big Ten championship game next week, and the playoff field, and the bracket, and every which other aspect of things when we talk next week. Before we depart this week, definitely would be remiss if we look past the basketball programs in the week that was for them. On the men's side, we talked about what a successful trip in Vegas could be, and boy, oh boy, did they ever come out with not just success. To go from very much in the mid to lower tier of the receiving votes, nobody knew exactly what to make of this men's program just yet, men's team this season. Because of, hey, it's college basketball. There's a lot of roster churn across the board. Nobody knows what to make of anybody just yet. Nobody knew what to make of UConn. I didn't see them losing 3 games. All right, well, Oregon turns around and picks up 3 really nice wins in Las Vegas with Texas A&M, San Diego State, and Alabama. And 2 quadrant 1 wins and a quadrant 2 win. Certainly the Alabama game will almost undoubtedly have the lasting power of staying there. The A&M game probably should. San Diego State, I would be stunned if it dropped from quadrant 2. It could move up. Time will tell. For the moment, the Oregon State win is quad 1, but on strength of schedule alone, Oregon State's going to have a brutal time staying there because they're 49. The cutoff is 50. I think 75 for road games. But be that as it may, it'll be hard for that to stay. But regardless, to shoot up into the top 15 between the polls, 10 and 12, 15 in the net, and have that kind of resume right now with Big Ten play starting with the LA schools this week and having the kind of performance that they did, not just with 3 wins, but individually, TJ Bamba playing really well. Obviously, Biddle with the big-time late basket against Alabama. This team's going to be awfully good. It has the pieces to be awfully good. And like we talked about in the last podcast about attendance and support and those things, hey, I'm sorry, but there's always an excuse. You know what? There isn't. If you wanted to take the wait and see, oh, they're never quite there yet. Oh, there's injuries. Oh, football season. Oh, game time. Oh, whatever. They're going to be hosting UCLA on Sunday. It's the highest Oregon's going to be ranked for a home game since February of 2020. They have sold out 1 game since 2018-19, and it was last year against Arizona. 1. They are 72nd in average attendance right now through the first 4 games. And look, those were some weaker opponents. I'm not telling you otherwise. But 72nd. This is a top 15 team who's coming off a tremendous week. To say nothing of, I don't know, Dana's entire tenure of 20 wins. This is a program that has long since earned greater support than it has gotten from the masses, let alone inside its own athletic department. This is a time where it's time to show up. This is a program and a team that is positioning itself to be among the best in the Big Ten immediately. And it needs its home court to be an advantage, particularly against a team like UCLA. In December, yes. Whether that's the students, whether that's the masses, yeah, they need that on Sunday. And they deserve it, and they've earned it. They earned it before the season. They really earned it over this past week. And then, yeah, there's a couple of other non-conference games throughout the month. Obviously, there's also the neutral site game down in the Bay Area in San Jose against Stanford, although that's the opening weekend of the playoff and the home games, and whether or not Oregon could be playing in that or not. That aside, yeah, this team had a great week, vaunted into the national scene in a hurry. To the victor should come the spoils, and the spoils should include at least 10,000 people being at this game on Sunday. Because less than 6,000, that ain't going to cut it. If you're a top 15 program at a major conference hosting a historically successful rival from a major conference, you should have an awfully nice turnout in the building. This is the kind of game where they need that. And again, before you get into the rest of Big Ten play and opening the year with Illinois and everyone, that's for weeks from now. This week, they go down to USC. Obviously, they're amid a big rebuild. They've had a clunky start to the season. That does not look to be terribly competitive, calling it what it is. And then UCLA on Sunday. We'll see how the Oregon men's team does. But as I say, the attendance and the support after the kind of week they just had, it would be awfully nice to see people show up in droves because, again, to me, this team and program, the program had earned it long before. This team earned it in a big way this past week. And on the women's side, obviously, Ryan, there were a couple of games in Hawaii that, yes, were quality opponents. Unfortunately for the Oregon women, not the results that they were looking for.
Yeah, they dropped two, obviously, in that tournament down in Hawaii to Georgia Tech, South Dakota State. Not terrible losses in the net necessarily.
No.
Q1 for Georgia Tech, Q2 for South Dakota State, but definitely a comeback down to earth for an Oregon team that had been really riding high in the early part of the season. Neutral site games, far to go. Tough teams. You still, I think, despite your strong start to the season, have a lot to figure out as a team, namely rotations and who's starting, who isn't on a team that has depth, yes, but who do you want to be your consistent starters? That is more in question now after these two games, I think, for the Ducks than it might have been through those first six, but plenty of opportunity through a really challenging Big Ten schedule to figure that out. And obviously they're back this week on Wednesday against Washington State, and then Saturday Big Ten play starts for them against USC. Juju Watkins coming into town. We talked ad nauseum before about how unfortunate it is that not a lot of folks will be able to attend that game, speaking on attendance, but also, a lot of folks probably won't pay attention to it because of the football Big Ten championship game, which sucks. But regardless, I think that this Oregon team has shown a lot of signs of being a positive surprise in the Big Ten so far. Now they have some tape on the bad side to look at, to examine, to see who works well together. I think the obvious positives that you've seen are, even though she went through a tough stretch for a couple games, Deja Kelly is your star player. You'd like to get more, I think, out of Peyton Scott than you got the last couple of games. She's capable, though, and she showed it through the first few in terms of her offensive ability and creation. And as Filipina Shea continues to get into more game shape and is able to play heavier minutes, how do you best utilize her and put her in the best team defense situations to where teams don't just exploit her by running the pick and roll at her the way that they do with certain bigs that might not move their feet as fast as others. So, how does that rotation work? How does Ahisa Tute fit into the mix, the freshman who's shown a lot of promise in the preseason and is just getting her legs up back under her after suffering an injury in international play? She's somebody that folks are really excited about in that Oregon program, so she could definitely be in the mix. There's a lot of different players that have made their way into the rotation, not the least important of which being Elisa Mevius, who has been an excellent defender for them all year, and I think someone that is deserving of more opportunity just based on what we've seen from her so far. Now, how that works out with rotations and matchups and everything, we'll see, but that's what I'm going to be watching as far as these next few games for the Ducks, is how those rotations shake out for Kelly Graves and company, and if they can get themselves back in a rhythm ahead of a huge matchup on Saturday.
Well, obviously, again, get into all things on the basketball front more in the weeks and months ahead, for sure. But obviously, we, like many, we will still be focusing extensively on this week's Big Ten championship game and all the things to come thereafter. Obviously, the playoff and all that. We'll get to that next week and the like. Before that, after that, all along the way, obviously, feel free to chime in and send your questions accordingly to Ryan's weekly mailbag, and remind folks, Ryan, how to go about doing that.
Yep, Ryan T. Clark on Twitter and Blue Sky, and then rclark@oregonian.com. Again, running low on questions this week. Really need more to make this worth doing here. And I know that people have questions. I know that there's folks out there that want to talk about stuff. So send them my way, man.
If every loss happens perfectly and the 12 seed is the weakest team I could possibly draw up, and then Oregon deliberately fails to convert on fourth down, knowing that it would play that team, you're saying that scenario also isn't better okay. I'm crafting the email for somebody who I guarantee, based on some of the emails I get, let alone some of them that come for Ryan's mailbag, I can attest. There's somebody out there is concocting a scenario. They're coming up with it, I promise you. But again, send your questions accordingly to Ryan, and he will wax poetic and try to answer as thoughtfully as possible there. Reminder, subscribe, 5-star review, like, et cetera, on the podcast, so that way Ducks Confidential and all the other Oregonian sports podcasts automatically populate to your feeds at whatever platform it is that you listen to accordingly, and make things easier for yourself and others with all of that. So with that, we will wrap up this edition of the podcast, and we will see you next week after the Big Ten championship game, playoff selection, and all the like, and to say nothing of the several basketball games that we'll weigh in on as well. And yes, for those who are making the trip to Indianapolis, enjoy, and obviously take in what should be quite the environment, to say the least, for a primetime matchup that, yes, both teams are going to be making the playoff field, but, you know, this is the first year in the Big Ten and playing in the Big Ten championship game. Yeah, don't just look past that, particularly if you are making the trip. Take it in and enjoy it at Lucas Oil Stadium. For those who aren't, enjoy it from home. And we will chat with you again next week.